Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to On Your Mental. If you're new to the podcast, my name is Reuben.
I'm Kabir.
And this is a podcast where we talk about things related to mental health, and in particular, men's mental health a lot of the time. This week, we've got a great guest for you. His name is Dennis Wong, and he is here to talk about spirituality, wellness, physical wellness, mental wellness, functional training, a whole bunch of really good stuff, and we had a great conversation. Kabir is just looking fit as ever. But we hope you enjoy this week's episode. If you haven't already, make sure that you're subscribed. And if you are new to the channel, if you like this one, leave a like. And we'll see you in a second when the episode starts. Peace. So we've known each other for about 3 years. That sounds good to me. This was a mistake. I'm going to ditch the jacket. What the fuck am I doing, man? It's so long.
At least he got in the shot. He wanted to show off his jacket.
Whatever.
Wasn't that great of a jacket anyway.
I just wanted to have like some color. I'm fucking wet, man. Anyways, but we've known each other for a short amount of time, but in that amount of time, I've like formed an opinion of you. I think you're a really good guy.
Thank you.
And so that's why I think that you're a nice person to talk to, but I think that you have interesting ideals and thoughts about the world around you. Kabir, you obviously don't follow Dennis on Instagram or anything.
I tried to find your Instagram.
Oh,
It's private.
Just looked
So
up
I was like, oh.
Dennis. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Just the name.
No,
Oh, you found it? Okay.
Yeah, it's like Reuben's following him.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay. But I like what you post about, and you post things around wellness and spirituality and kind of how you see the world.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. A big mixed bag,
Okay.
you know, diving into a few different things, but
Love a good variety.
a lot of good variety. I think that we can probably talk about a lot of this stuff too. So I think this will be a nice little like round
I
table
love it.
here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want more input.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. But the first thing that I wanted to ask about is kind of how we all see wellness and spirituality in our lives, and like what are the elements that make up those things to us, because I think it's probably subjective. You know, when I think about myself at least and how I feel about wellness, that's usually immediately I jump to physical, you know, because that's just the easiest I think to interpret. With us running this podcast here, I do think about mental wellness a lot. Spirituality for me, I start to think about religion, but I'm not religious. So then it's like I guess that's the connectedness to the rest of the world around you. That's how I start to think about spirituality, but that's very surface level. So the question is for us, what are those elements to you? What do spirituality and wellness look like in your lives?
Well, if I had to put like wellness into just like one sentence, like what that means for me, I think wellness ultimately boils down to having balance,
Sure.
learning how to balance multiple things. So you have to realize like you exist, and there's many different layers to your existence. There's like your physical self, like you mentioned, or your emotional self, your mental self, and your relationships that you have with the people around you. So then you have to learn what to prioritize and how to maintain balance while you're realizing all these things that are just happening to you, right?
Right.
And then for me, spirituality, I think I relate to you, where I think as a society, we've deviated away from like religion. We're less religious as a collective, but we're still looking for greater meaning than just simply like existing and getting a job and getting money.
That's so true.
And getting a relationship and then just going through the motions until you die. So we need to search for something meaningful in our lives. And I think that's where spirituality has becoming more widespread in that aspect. And so for me, it's been a process of looking for deeper meaning outside of just looking for a job, getting a secure a place, getting a partner, and then settling down. I think we all have to go through that regardless, but you want to justify like why you're doing certain things. So you start looking inwards as to like what makes you you, and how does that differ from other individuals. And the more you spend time being compassionate towards who you are, I find that it's easier to be able to relate to others, because you realize that you're just as human as the other individual. So then you're able to extend that compassion outwards.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That was fucking sick right away, man.
Okay, awesome.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's
Yo, good start,
There it
man.
is. Good night, everybody.
Yeah. That's a really interesting way of putting it. Like, we talk about balance a lot on the podcast, but to really like break it down and think of balancing all of those aspects of your life, and that is wellness, you know, that's a really, really good way of putting that. And I like what you're saying about spirituality, and that I agree that maybe there is like a bit of a cultural shift away from religion being the standard for what spirituality is. It still has its place, but right. I think more and more of us, I mean, a lot of people that we know, I would say, are not particularly religious around like our age, at least our friend group, but maybe that's because we associate with them, you know. What do you think, Cabs?
I'm not gonna beat that, but no, I was gonna say, I feel like I agree, because they're in regarding spirituality, because there is something like inside of you that wants like a deeper connection with the world and people around you, and just like a more meaning, right? We want to understand, we want almost like a connection, like a scientific connection of why are we doing things, or you know what, like why are we going through the motions, essentially. But yeah, with religion, that has its place there, but people who are not religious, I like myself personally, it's almost like I'm searching for something else. Not like every day, you know, I'm not, it's like I'm thinking about it in the back of my mind. But yeah, that's when I think about spirituality, that's what I think about, like a deeper connection with the world. Yeah. But with wellness, I feel like that's more something, or things like I practice every day, whether it be like physical. We talked about mental when I'm doing the podcast here. What are some examples of like emotional wellness though? Like maybe what is like I'm
good relationships, like healthy what do you like,
what do I define
like
emotional wellness?
Yeah.
I think emotional wellness is being resilient. Like, you're able to handle your emotions. Like, you recognize that there's going to be positive and negatives, and things are always in flux, right? But you're able to be composed, and you're able to allow yourself to feel those emotions. Like, whether you're feeling sad, you're feeling angry, you're giving yourself that space to say, that's valid. Whatever I'm feeling, that's valid. And then, because you're giving yourself that allowance, you basically then can choose how you respond in any given moment, rather than being identified with the emotions. Like, I'm feeling angry, and that fuels your thoughts. Then you become reactive. Then I gotta do this, and then you're less in control. Right. So I think emotional wellness really boils down to being able to respond consciously rather than unconsciously, because there's always going to be things that are outside of your control, like people's actions, people's behaviors. And if you're always reactive to the external environment, then you can argue whether you're really in control or not. Right. So I think emotional wellness comes to first allowing yourself to feel emotions and recognizing that you have emotions. A lot of people repress it. A lot of people would say like unpleasantness is something that they'll try and avoid. Sure. Right. Discomfort is something that nobody really wants to experience. But I think it's a part of life, and you just got to understand that's something that you have to feel through, because everything is going to change. Like, there's this like famous quote which says like, this too shall pass. Yeah. Right. But that also implies like the highest moments in your life, that too shall pass. So why are you resisting the negative moments in your life? Because that too shall pass. So when you're able to come to that realization, it doesn't matter as much when you're experiencing the lows in your life, because you're less attached to it, and you're more detached to both the highs and the lows, and you're able to stay grounded as a result. So that's my take on emotional wellness.
It's like having you mentioned the fact that you have control over your reaction to your emotions, right? There's a lot of stuff like that that's been popping up for me when I've been reading around things recently, where it's like, you shouldn't get angry at a situation. You should think about the fact that maybe you are being upset or affected by what's happening around you, and then reflect on that emotion. Is that kind of like what you mean by that? I
wouldn't say you shouldn't be angry. I think whatever feeling you feel, or whatever arises within you, that's valid. Like, that's there whatever for a reason. Something happened where, like, for example, someone did you wrong. You feel angry in that moment. That's valid. but that doesn't necessarily indicate that you have to act out on the anger.
Mm.
And I think that wellness component comes from the realization that you can kind of dissociate from that feeling, but still allowing that feeling to be present in your body.
Sure.
Because a lot of people will be like, I don't like that feeling, and they're going to suppress that. Or that feeling fuels their thoughts, and then they're reactive to, okay, now this person did that to me, so they're going to create a story behind it, and that just perpetuates that that feeling. So you don't actually you're not grounded in the present moment anymore.
Interesting. I like it.
Yeah, gotta let it marinate.
Gotta let it marinate. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of Joe's podcast when he was talking about. I think we were talking about Joe with about anxiety, and then he says
Anxiety
kind
and
of
stress,
let yourself be anxious at the time, and kind of, I guess, just reflect on it, and that would ultimately help.
Yeah, I guess so.
Definitely terrible paraphrasing, but
no, but that's fine.
Yeah.
With spirituality, then, like, what does that kind of look like in your life? Like, do you practice spirituality? Do you feel like you're doing things consciously and like making an effort to like feel more connected to the world? Like, what are some things that you do?
Well, spirituality, like I was kind of talking about earlier, it's like finding a deeper sense of self, and finding a deeper meaning in your life, aside from just fulfilling the normal obligations of like a human society. So for me, that means knowing how to anchor my conscious awareness in the present moment. That's my spiritual practice. I know it's probably going to be different for everybody.
Is that kind of like meditation then?
It can be. I mean, I personally, I regard literally anything you can do can be some form of meditation. Like cooking can be a form of meditation. Walking can be a form of meditation. Even now I'm trying to like work is a form of meditation, because it just means your consciousness is anchored in the present moment. You're not thinking about the future in the moment. You're not thinking about the past. You're just fully aware and present with whatever it's in front of you. So you're fully present, and that's a spiritual practice on its own for me. So that's been my path, and when I've done that, I realized that the baggage of like past experiences don't hold me as much. Like it doesn't affect me as much, because I'm able to let go and realize that everything that exists only exists in the now. Like like if I'm thinking about the past, it's only occurring in this moment. So why am I spending this present moment thinking about the past when I have my life ahead of me, right? And you brought about anxiety. Anxiety is when you're living in fear of the future,
right?
And that usually because you're perceiving the future through the lens of the past. You're looking at your past experiences, and you're looking at the worst moments in your life, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a whole future ahead of me, going through the same thing again. Right. So you're replaying past experiences in your mind, and you're less grounded in the present moment. So then you're kind of stuck in the past, and you're always anticipating a future that
replicates that
past. So that's where anxiety for me, from my understanding, that's where that comes from. And that was a place I found myself in my younger 20s and mid 20s, especially after I graduated. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do in my life? What value do I bring to the table? And who am I as a person, right? So again, like going back to spirituality, it's learning how to anchor myself in the present moment, being fully present. From one of the books that I read by Eckhart Tolle, like The Power of Now, he talks about the primary purpose of existence is just living in the moment. All else is secondary. So that means like the obligations you have in life, fulfilling a job, having a partner, having meaningful relationships with other people, those are secondary purposes. If you're not present in the moment, there's no real purpose of existing whatsoever. Right. Because then you're just going to be thinking about the past or anticipating about a future, and then you die. Yeah. You never really live. So my spiritual practice is just anchor yourself in the moment right now.
I feel like things like anxiety and stress would really get in the way of the ability to anchor. Do y'all think that everybody has the opportunity to find a sense of spirituality in their lives? Or are some people just kind of unable to find that connection?
Well, I think like spirituality, like when you try to think too hard about it, it becomes a concept. It's like conceptualized. Like I'm spiritual, but you're just putting a label towards something that is just kind of beyond words. When I say you're looking for a deeper meaning to your existence, I think you're looking as to why do you exist outside of the human paradigm. Like, why am I conscious? Why am I having a reality? Why do I feel things? And you have to take responsibility for your own inner energetic space.
I mean, the reason why I wanted to ask that was because hearing you talk about this, I don't know that I have a real sense of spirituality at all. Like, I just know that I am not someone who follows or conforms to like a religious sense of spirituality. But now hearing you like break this down, I'm sitting here thinking like, what is spirituality to me, man? Like, I don't know. Like, now I'm like, oh shit, like what is it? And in a way now I'm thinking outside of what the present is, but I'm trying to figure it out now. Just sitting here, I'm just thinking, what does spirituality mean?
It's complex.
It's complex, but like, but I wish I had an answer.
Right.
I wish I had an understanding of it. You know.
I think it's about like going back to being anchored in the present moment. When you're able to do that consistently, your true self kind of shines through your human form, so to speak. Because now you're no longer held by the past experiences. You're operating from a place where you have a vision, you have a certain goal in your mindset. Like, I want to be this person. I want to be able to do this. I want to live this life. So you're building towards that vision, but you're not allowing the past affect how you're operating in every given moment. So I think everybody can tap into spirituality. It isn't just having some crystals and waving incense and then just sitting in front of a yoga mat and saying like Om and then meditating. I think that's just a concept of what spirituality is. Like I said, anything can be a spiritual practice. It just means you have a focused intent and you're fully present doing whatever you're going about. So,
bit of a left turn here, but maybe in a way kind of related. When you're talking about like anything can be a practice of spirituality and meditation, privately, we've talked a lot about your passion for like physical wellness as well. Kabir, you also have a pretty big passion, I'd say, for physical wellness, right?
I can tell.
So I kind of want to know then, like, how does that fit into that construct of wellness and spirituality for you? Do you ever find movement and that kind of thing maybe being a place of meditation or spirituality for you?
Of course. I think for us, like you're talking about like stress and anxiety, a lot of that comes from living in the mind, and we're not so present in our own bodies. So we're not aware of like how we're breathing. We just breathe because that's like a subconscious thing. So when we're exercising, we have no choice but to kind of feel our bodies, right? Like we're lifting weights, we're training, we're running. We're going to be out of breath. We're going to be fatigued. We're going to be tired. So your attention is more focused inwards on your sensations, your body. I think with that practice comes a new level of awareness, because now you're paying attention to how you're feeling, less of what you're thinking, right? Most people that lift weights or go to the gym, they do it because it feels like all of their worldly problems just suddenly go away, right? And you're more tapped. Yeah, you're more tapped in. I think for me, that's why movement and breath work and training plays a crucial role in spirituality, because it has helped me become more aware of how I'm actually feeling rather than what I'm thinking in the moment.
Have you felt as though like, and sorry if you were going to say anything, I don't know, but have you felt as though practicing that through like fitness, do you then take like that feeling or that sensation of recognizing when you are being present into the other aspects of your life? Does that make sense? Like what I'm asking there?
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question. So I mean like when you're saying that you're at the gym and that's when you realize that you're just thinking about how you feel. You're not thinking about things outside of what's going on right there, because you're so focused on things like your soreness, your breath, whatever.
Yes.
Thinking about that consciously, that feeling while you're at the gym, are you now able to notice that same feeling in other parts of your life?
Yes, it's definitely transferable, right? Now that I'm like more focused about my body, and less in my head, that still translates to whatever else I'm doing. For example, when I'm cooking, I'm paying attention to if there's any tension in my shoulders. Am I scrunching up my shoulders? Am I shallowly breathing? Am I standing in a weird pose? Is my hip like hiked on one end for extended periods of time? Like, you can't help but build that awareness over time. But a lot of people that don't practice like training, they're less inclined to have that awareness, and they have to they don't become aware of it until like they start experiencing pain, and then they're like, how come I'm getting pain in my body? And then people will say, oh, you're aging, you're getting old. But it's just I argue that it's the lack of awareness of where we're placing tension in our body, and how our body's actually adapting, because your body's changing all the time. Nothing stands still. So it's about, when it comes to training, it's about coming into it with intent. And if you have intent about how your body is being shaped, that stays with you no matter what else you're doing. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. Yeah.
No, it's no, I feel the same way, but like sometimes it almost feels like I'm too aware.
Yeah.
Like the way I'm sleeping and stuff, how I wake up in the morning, shoulders are scrunched forward. I'm like, is it always like this? Or I'm just like more aware now than I was, let's say 5 years ago. And like my stance, let's say you're doing dishes, like I've got hip problems every once in a while. And I'm like, am I putting too much pressure on my toes when I'm standing up? And I don't know, like it's definitely, I agree, it's definitely a positive thing to think about in the long run, but like sometimes it stresses me out, you know.
Yeah.
I feel like at the very start of the conversation, when I mentioned wellness, I said that the first thing that comes to mind for me is physical, and that's because it's so easy and tangible to see, you know. So I wish that I could be as aware of physical like abnormalities in my body, like in the present moment, as I could be for my emotions or my thoughts, and be so conscious of, am I thinking a certain way for an extended period of time, the same way you might be leaning on your hip in a certain way or hinging your hip in a certain way for an extended period of time. It's way easier to notice the physical thing. And maybe that's why when I'm thinking about spirituality and not knowing what spirituality is to me, like maybe that's part of why it's so difficult, is that I'm not practiced at that yet, of being so aware. I get moments where I might like journal or something like that, and then now I'm more aware because I'm in the moment and I'm thinking about these thoughts there. That's almost like a physical like gym practice for my mind, you know. But it's harder, I think, to notice throughout the day, like just day to day.
Right. And it's definitely tricky. Like I get lost into my own mind and my own thoughts. Like at every moment, no one's kind of like, you're enlightened and then that's it. Like you realize everything and then that's the end of the tunnel. Like, no, it's like an ongoing practice. But like with meditation, if you are to sit down and to kind of sit still with your mind and your body, you start paying attention to like your emotions, like how you're feeling and your thoughts. And when I say paying attention, it means observing that you have thoughts and that you have feelings. Now, I think the spiritual practice comes in when you realize that there's like an observer of your thoughts. And then you start questioning, wait, so if I have thoughts and I have feelings and those are changing over time, and there's an observer that realizes that I'm having thoughts and feelings, then who is the observer? And it's kind of an intangible thing because everybody has that level of awareness if you practice it. We can all realize that we have thoughts and feelings, and we can't say that this thought is who I am or this feeling is who I am, because that means you're changing all the time, which is still a part of your human aspect of being. But then who is the observer? That's the question that I have for myself at the very least. And the more that you practice it, the more you anchor yourself with identifying with the observer and less so with the thoughts and feelings. And that's again where I tie in spirituality, is realizing you're the observer. Now the observer is kind of not your physical self, so to speak, and it's not your mind. So we already concluded that it's not your mind nor your body. Man. You have to realize that like very different thing through meditation. Like you have to realize that there is an observer. And that dissociation takes a long time to kind of realize. A lot of people are reactive because they identify with their mind. If something happens to them, this is what happened. I got to do this. I got to do that back to the other person or whatever the case. because you're identified with thoughts, and then that thought feels your feelings, and the feeling feels your thoughts, and it becomes like a feedback loop.
Man.
And then over time, that just becomes, that's just who I am. But it's just like, no, like, because you're just trying to perpetuate a story that you're telling yourself based on a temporary thought or feeling.
You've thought a lot of this through, hey?
Yeah.
A little bit.
I hope so, yeah. I hope this makes sense. Like,
I think you were losing me at first, and then I started to catch
and
on
then it
after.
catches in.
Okay.
Yeah. Fuck, man. Really good.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I think you're like incredibly articulate with this. It's a hard concept to put into words. That's something that you were sharing with me before coming on, was you were concerned of being even able to put any of this stuff into words. Because at a surface level, it can be very simplistic. Things like meditation, you know what I mean? You be present. You could leave it at that. But then when you dive into what that means, that's when you get into stuff like this. But I do want to touch on some of the physical wellness side of things, and functional fitness. The ability to move is kind of what comes to my mind there, and like recognizing that this vessel that you have, your body, is the only one you got, and maybe that is part of your own thinking of functional fitness. But you've talked to me about wanting to rethink the idea of what functional fitness is. What do you mean by that?
So when I think of function, I think of the ability to do something, right? So we're humans. We have like arms and legs, and we can walk, we can crawl, we can run. So when I think function, I think the very bare minimum, like we should all be able to walk, run, get into a squat, climb.
For those of us that are able-bodied,
Right.
and without
and you're
severe
talking,
disability.
And you're talking about movement. So movement only occurs when you have a joint. You can't have movement without a joint, right? So then when I say what is functional movement, or what is functional training, a lot of people start thinking, oh, it's a burpee, or it's a I don't know, it's like a kettlebell squat or something like that. But those are patternized movements. That doesn't necessarily equate to function, because function is subjective. What are you looking to do as a human individual? Do you want to dance? Do you want to climb mountains? Do you want to be able to run long distances, right? Functional is subjective in that aspect, but there's still the bare minimum. Like, can you get into a squat? Can you walk? Can you climb the stairs, right? Like, there's a bare kind of a prerequisite. So when I think of function, I look at the individual joint level. Every joint has, it can express movement and varying degrees of ranges of motion, right? Like the hip joint, it can do rotational movements as well as it can do linear motion. When you do squat, it's all like up and down, up and down. So you're training the tissue in a specific manner, but your hips can do much more than that. So when I think of function, I think of, do my joints have the ability to express the ranges of motions that joint can express? Because if you're not training the joints in the way that it can move, you're going to lose it. It's the use it or lose it principle.
Use it or lose it, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So then when we think function, everyone's just looking at Instagram and looking at all the sexy exercises, and then everyone's trying to one-up each other with like the most difficult thing to do.
Right.
But I don't necessarily translate that to function. That could actually lead to dysfunction, because we end up just imitating patternized movements, but that's not what our body really understands, because we're conceptualizing movement. We're saying there's no part in our brain that says there's a squat. Like, you don't press a button and then you squat. You just learn how to kind of contort your body. But then I would ask, do you have the prerequisites to do something like a squat, for example, or a snatch or overhead press? And what are the joints that are involved in those motions? Are those joints healthy? Because if your joints can't express that range of motion for that movement, something else is compensating for that movement.
Right.
So then people say, I do functional training to be healthy. I would argue, but if your joint isn't able to express those ranges of motion, are you really training towards health? Or are you training towards dysfunction?
Are you just training to do the movements that someone says is functional training?
So that's what I mean by rethinking functional, because at the end of the day, I think everybody has different goals of what they want their bodies to be capable of. But I think we need to explore more on where our joints currently are at. And I talked about adaptation, right? Like, your body's changing all the time. So if you're spending like the majority of your day sitting, for example, and then you go for a 1 hour hit class, and you're just
Blasting
your body and
Yeah.
training hard, your body's gonna only adapt so much to that stimuli. The rest of the time you're spending, if you're sitting, for example, your body's still adapting to that stimuli. So so there needs to be a greater awareness to like, how is my joint actually functioning in this given moment? Do I have the prerequisites to do any of those training movements safely? Right? You have to explore your internal environment before you add on like external load.
How do you get to that point then? Do you all feel that you're functional? Do you feel like you're training functionally? Yeah, if you're shaking your head.
I'm much more aware of it now than I even was maybe a year ago. I'm definitely not taking the right steps, I would say. I'm still doing a lot of like bodybuilding type exercises, a lot of like small repetitive movements, which I wouldn't say are functional, very functional at all. But I want to start training for longevity. So what would that look like in your opinion? Like, is it more, should I be incorporating more stretching? Because you like, use it or lose it. But I'm not really using much at all,
His
like,
hips do lie.
And so so let's say if we're talking functional, my goal for the future would be to train for longevity, to be able to train without injury for as long as I can till the end of my life, let's say. So what steps should I be taking in your opinion?
I think if you're working towards longevity, I would start exploring every joint in isolation of itself. So I studied from a guy that created this course called FRC. His name is Dr. Spina. For those that want to do a little bit more research, he calls himself like his system called like functional range systems,
Sure.
FRS. But he isolates every joint, and he argues that you need to be able to move your joints independently before you work them interdependently. So he talks about like entropy. Like if you're not training the tissues in your joint capsules, it breaks down over time. And if we're only doing certain movements in certain ranges of planes of motions, for example, we're neglecting all the other ranges of motions that joint can express. So those tissues will naturally atrophy. And your joint capsule, because it doesn't train in the way that it can express movement, like rotational movement, for example, for hips, over time it's going to wear down, and we're just relying on the muscles that we've trained and strengthened, whereas all the other areas are atrophying with time. And you're going to hit a plateau, because you can argue you can still make strength gains doing squats and whatnot, but you're going to hit a plateau, and then eventually you're just overly relying on those lines of tissues, and all the other lines of tissues are neglected as a result. And injury occurs when the load-bearing capacity of those tissues, or I should say, when the force exceeds the load-bearing capacity of your tissues, right? That's when your tissues snap, right?
So
that's
then
when
at any
something breaks.
moment, if you deviated off of that exact like training path for those tissues, and then you started to like work your muscle in a different way, then that's now going to open up a larger opportunity for injury.
100%.
That's why I'm hearing that.
Yeah, like if you look at a bodybuilder, like they look super, super strong, but then you ask them to do something else outside of what they're training.
Reach their back.
They don't have the capability to do
Yeah.
so. So then you start arguing what is really strength. Right, and that stems from the principle of specificity. Like you get what you train for, but you have to understand that the body doesn't necessarily respond to patternized movement. It just responds to force. So whatever force or stimuli you're inputting into your body is going to respond and adapt accordingly. So I think functional training, it requires a lot more awareness of what your overall intent is for the body, realizing what each joint is capable of doing, and then working from there. So you got to improve joints, because you have shitty joints, you're going to have shitty movements. But if you have good joints, then you have the kind of prerequisites to express good movements.
Right, that foundation.
Even with like patternized movements, like just doing 2 sets of or 2 reps of squats, 1 rep versus the other, the muscles that are utilized fire in different sequences. You can't have an exact replicate of the same movement. So that means that you need to have good tissue to respond to a greater movement variability, like the ability to move in different ways.
That makes sense. So this guy, the person who you're talking about learning from, isolates every joint.
There's something that you can search on the internet. It's called controlled articular rotations. That's like a good way to first assess like how well your joints are moving. There's like a full body CARS, if you will, like controlled articular rotations. And then you can also use that as like maintenance tool to kind of keep your joints like lubricated and
write that down.
And healthy.
Yeah.
But then we also talk about expanding the ranges of motions of each joint, like how far can the degrees of freedoms of each joint express movement. So then that incorporates like PALS and rails, which is short for progressive angular isometric loading, or regressive angular isometric loading. Yeah, it's a lot of fancy jargon.
Yeah.
But it's basically if you think about like what is the difference between flexibility and mobility. Flexibility is the ability to get into a position passively. But mobility, as I look at it and how Dr. Espino looks at it, is the ability to get into a position actively. So rather than passively, because you can't have strength getting out of a position if you're always just in a passive position. Like if you get into a split, a lot of people can't get into a split, but if I told you to raise one of your legs to 90 degrees and then I asked you to raise the other leg to 90 degrees, you can do that. But why
like
can't
on its own?
Yeah, on its own. But then when I ask you to do both legs at 90 degrees, so that creates the split, right? The 180, you're unable to do so. And it's because your nervous system knows better than your mind that it can't get itself out of that position because it has no active capability. There's no strength in that position to get out of it. So your nervous system is smarter than your brain and your mind. It recognizes that, there's no control in terms of being able to contract the muscles and safely get yourself out of that position.
Right.
So it prohibits you from getting into those positions.
I've never thought of that before, because I can lift my leg up. You know, I can't do both. No way in hell, man.
So,
it's funny when you were saying earlier in the conversation, you talked about like people wanting to avoid discomfort, right? Hearing you talk about functional training here and rethinking that and focusing on joints being such a key piece of that. I avoid exercises in the gym because I know that there are exercises I'm uncomfortable with. And it's almost like that anxiety piece of like having a bad past experience and then not wanting to do something because you think you're going to have a bad experience again. My back injury that I had has made me scared to do certain exercises like ever. But I love them, and then like I can do them, and I've gone back to them a couple times, but I'm also just like, if I have a workout list and I have my exercises I'm going through, I will skip that one sometimes. You know what I mean? I won't touch a deadlift. I won't do a rack pull because they've hurt me before.
Right.
You know? And I avoid that.
Exact same. And I would started going to physio, and then he was like, no, you like this might have actually like this is the exercise that hurt you or like hurt you, but that's not like what it actually, like you should. This is like, let's say deadlifts, that's actually supposed to be helping you. Like it's part of your therapy essentially.
But it's that like overcompensation that's been built up from neglecting maybe these other movements or the ability to move with these joints that has led to us getting injured like this. You know what I mean? Yeah. Man, it's scary.
Because like when you get injured, you start going to like a physical therapist or a physiotherapist, and they'll like rehab you, right? But when I think of rehab, it just means it got you back to the level where you left off before you got injured. But you got to realize why you got injured in the first place. There's definitely some dysfunction occurring at one of the joints in which you're trying to do that movement that caused that area to get inflamed or injured or whatever the case, right? So I think part of going back into training requires you to take a proactive measure towards preventative care. And that, again, goes back to not focusing on patternized movement, but more tissue-specific movement. Do I have the tissue capacity to express that movement? Like back to the squat, because I love talking about the squat. If you don't have good ankle dorsiflexion, right, and that's a huge component of your squat, then where does that force go? That probably goes maybe towards your knee, because now you don't have the ability to flex your toes up to then allocate that load towards like your glutes and your quads efficiently.
Right.
So now the knee takes a bit of that impact, and you might be good after like 1 month or 2 months of training, but over time your knee wasn't designed to take on that kind of load.
Right.
So then it gets injured, and then you go to the therapist, and you're like, oh, they fix your knee up, and they're like, okay, I'm back in training. And then you're like, I don't want to go through that again. So you do feel a bit anxious, but we haven't really addressed the root cause as to why that happened.
Which would be in this case that ankle.
For example, yeah. So that's one way to look at like rehab versus prehab, and they should go hand in hand.
Cool.
Sounds like you're a knees over toes guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
I
yeah.
definitely love that guy.
Yeah, that guy's sick. He's my ankles are bad. I've talked to you about my ankles before.
I feel like
I
everyone, a
struggle with
lot of
squats.
people's ankles are bad.
I definitely do not, like when you said dorsiflexion, I don't know if any of these cameras got it, but like I'm flexing my ankle up like it's not doing the
I've been starting to
should.
do like before leg days, I've been actively like trying to like stretch out my calf and then like pressing down and trying to get my, I don't know, just getting a lot of flexion in the ankle.
Well, going into this topic, it could be a whole nother so because
a whole episode on the squats
or just on like
ankles.
intrinsic foot strengthening, because again, goes back to like adaptation. Like, what are we doing most of the time versus what are we doing in the gym? Most of the time we're wearing shoes. Now, shoes aren't necessarily great for our bodies. It's comfortable, and we forget that we're wearing shoes, and then we're just going about our day. But we're basically cramming our toes and everything inside this human invented device, or this proper like footwear. And over time, you're not training those tissues. You're just keeping them kind of compressed and relaxed, but also you're not paying. And then there's like what is it called, like heel support, ankle support, whatever the case. So you're, all the exactly, all the intrinsic muscles that would otherwise be utilized in terms of stability, having proper balance, and having proper toe mobility, that's completely taken out of the window. And then you accumulate years of that, and then you ask yourself, do I have ankle mobility? Do I have the ability to balance evenly on my foot? Chances are the answer is no. And then people jump into like a HIIT workout, and then they cross their fingers and hope they don't get injured, but that's just wishful, like you're just wishful thinking. So again, when I think of rethinking functional training, it's about looking at where you're coming from. Do you have the prerequisites, and where is your body currently at, and working with intent, and coming outside of patternized movement, trying to imitate and contort our bodies in human designed training versus just looking at our inner capacity for movement, expressing movement.
I love it.
Barefoot squats.
We're going for them. I got to start walking around the house barefoot more, because I always put on my little slides here just because they're comfortable. But if I was at least getting some barefoot time at home, that's nice. It stinks a little, but what are you gonna do? The thing I want to touch on next is about the concept of know thyself, which you had it's on your Instagram. It's up there. I saw it on one of your highlight things. And so far we've talked a little bit about spirituality. We've talked about wellness and balance in wellness, and we've talked a lot about like physical wellness. What does it mean to know thyself? Let's start there and kind of expand on that as we go.
So time back to where I was talking about meditating and observing your thoughts and feelings, and realizing that your thoughts and feelings are always changing all the time. When you start to anchor your identity with the observer of your thoughts and feelings, you start to realize that the observer is more of the I am principle, like the fact that you just simply exist. Like you have consciousness, and there's the I am, like that's just that precedes everything else.
Sure.
So then you start to realize that is truly who you are, just the I am aspect of being. And then you start to realize that you can write everything afterwards as who you are. So I am, and then you can fill in the blank. but most of us try to fill in the blank with past experiences. I am because I went to this school. I am because I have this job. I am because of my childhood upbringing. So learning how to dissociate your experiences and letting that just simply define who you are, that's where I have the know thyself theme going on. It's really exploring that you're always changing, but you're the one in control. The I am aspect allows you to control and dictate where you're headed in life. And ultimately that I am is how we're all connected, because at the end of the day, before you are Reuben, before I see you that you're working at this place, or you're have this educational background, you were once just a conscious being.
Sure.
And so was I, and so was everyone else. So that's how we're all connected in that aspect. And then we add on layers based on our upbringing, based on our conditioning, that I am this or I am that. But knowing thyself is enabling you to break away from subconscious patterns that actually are disempowering you. So that's where I'm going with it. And that's what it means to me, is learning that I am just the awareness, and then everything else I can then add on to that.
Sure. So it's like you are not your experiences.
It's
you
like,
are not your past.
it's like going back to the original you. Like it's the pure form, essentially, without any experiences, without any traumatic or traumas that you've taken on, essentially.
Would you have an answer to fill that blank of I am?
Well, you can write into that blank whatever you actually desire. So the spiritual path for everybody will deviate from that point, because there's no right way of living, I don't believe. But ultimately, it lets you become more empowered in taking control of defining who you are. Because if you actually ask who you truly are, I believe it's actually undefinable, because we're defining in every moment, but that moment fades.
Right.
So then again, you're changing and growing, and you can't really fixate or label or conceptualize, this is just who I am.
Right.
I think if you're inside that box, then you're stuck, and that's where a lot of people will start struggling with anxiety and depression, because then like I've heard people say like, I'm not good with math, or like I'm not good with this, and then they just leave it at that.
Right.
And it becomes a subconscious program, and they never try and explore if they're actually capable of being good at what they think they're bad at. They don't allow themselves that experience.
That's just dismissed.
That's just automatically dismissed. That's just a program, but that's not really ultimately who you are. So I think learning how to dissociate from those programs begins that journey of redefining who you are. And that's, again, ties back to knowing thyself.
My mind's going to wander a little bit here, but I'm going to try and like connect it. So
it's hard to talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah. And thinking of, say, you have something that you don't think you're good at, so you don't try it anymore. I thought recently, I was thinking, like at the end of the day, we're all just people. That's that connectedness, at the very base, everybody is a conscious person, right? Everybody, and we have that in common with each other. And people just so happen to have tried something, enjoyed it, and stuck with it and practiced it and gotten better and better and better at it. And I may have tried something and not had a great experience. For example, math. I didn't go past like calculus, I think, in school. But that doesn't mean that I couldn't revisit that perhaps and end up like rebuilding a skill, because anybody can learn something. Like that's kind of like the way that I feel about that. So you are not the things that you do. You're not the things that you've experienced. You're just
like, well, you're not the
there.
limitations that you've set for yourself. But then I think when it comes to learning something, you have to actually care about what you're learning. Otherwise, you're not going to actually grasp it.
And that's why it's okay to not care about something. It's
Yes.
like that's maybe part of knowing thyself, is like if I don't want to pursue getting better at math, let's say, that's fine.
Exactly.
I don't have to do that, and you don't have to beat yourself up for not doing that. Right. Is that kind of does that fit into that at all?
100%, because it then ties back to like this kind of the spiritual aspect of like, okay, what are the things that I'm actually passionate about, or what are the things I actually care about, and how do I bridge that gap from not knowing the things that I care about to knowing the things I care about. And that just requires awareness. So you can say I am, and then you fill in the blank, like I am great at being a public speaker.
Sure.
But then you start kind of like, now you start observing how you feel when you make a statement like that, right? You can call that like an affirmation. But then most people will be like, they'll feel anxious, like, oh, that's a lie. I'm not actually good at public speaking, right? So then that actually allows you to do the work to explore what are the things that are inhibiting you from feeling that you're actually good at being a public speaker, for example, and you work backwards. But you first make that statement because that's something you care about. Like, for example, I want to be good at public speaking. That's something you care about. So you're bound to learn how to be good at that.
Right.
But you have to work backwards. First, you have to give yourself permission to feel that you can be a good public speaker. And then you look backwards, like, well, I'm lacking knowledge in this area, or I'm lacking confidence in myself. And then you start exploring the reasons why, and then you work your way back towards that affirmation. So that's how I look at it. And again, you can literally fit whatever you want in that blank.
Yeah, and use it almost as like a blueprint for I guess like building who you are.
Exactly.
I like that.
So
Very
then
cool.
everyone's path of knowing thyself will lead to kind of an individualized self or an authentic self, because now you're giving yourself permission to be authentic. And you no longer have to feel like there's an imposter syndrome.
Right.
So
I like that. I really like that approach.
It makes me want to like, oh no, sorry.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, no, it makes me want to like find out all the things I'm like self-conscious about.
Yeah,
and kind of just work on that. Create a new self.
Yeah. That's
But
cool.
I won't.
But it's a cool idea.
Yeah.
The last kind of thing we'll touch on around this whole idea of know thyself, but I want to come back to our thing with on your mental. Where does mental health fit into your ideas of wellness? For myself, it's become more and more of a important piece, I think, when I think of, am I feeling well? I'll go back and re-listen to this episode again and start to think more about like that balance between all of those points that you talked about, and then try and shift my mindset to this whole idea of wellness rather than individual silos of like physical wellness, mental wellness, emotional wellness, right? But mental health, I find, is important part in my concept of what wellness is. I think when I am dealing with stresses or feeling anxious, whatever it might be, that comes to the forefront of the mind very easily, and then I like that can make me not feel as though I am well, because I'm so fixated on like the negativity of whatever mental health thing I'm dealing with at the moment. So for me, mental health is probably a pretty big piece of what that balance is, if that makes sense, that there can be maybe more weight to those elements of wellness in your life. But what does mental health fit in for you in your concepts of wellness?
That's definitely a tough question. I might need some time to think about that one. I mean, like, maybe I will ask you, because you do on your mental, like, in terms of your definition of mental health, like, how do you define it? And I'll try to like fit my answer to the best of like what you're defining it as.
I'll try my best.
Yeah.
Yeah, Reuben, what is mental health?
What is mental health? Health.
What is health?
I want to give a real answer, so I don't want to just like bullshit. My concept of mental health would be feeling, in a way, it's like in control of emotion and state. Because when you think of the negative things around mental health, say depression, anxiety, stress, those take away from your control over your mind, you know? And when you're mentally healthy, you have like a clear vision of the challenges that the world is going to present to you. And so when I think of what mental health looks like and having good mental health, it's being able to deal with the challenges and the realities of everyday life. Because if you do not have sound mental health, anything can throw you off, or you may not even be willing to confront a challenge that life is presenting to you. Does that make sense?
Make sense.
Yeah.
Like I can like draw an analogy, like just like physical health, right? You have an immune system. Like if you get sick, but you're healthy, you're going to be able to recover that
It
much
bounces
faster.
back quicker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So having good mental health, I guess, for me in terms of wellness, is being able to bounce back from like anxiety or depression or whatever. Because like you said, there's going to be many factors outside of our control in life that you just have to sort of deal with. And like nobody asked for it, nobody wants to deal with it, but it just happens to you. And how
that's just
do
the
you,
reality of life.
how do you come to terms with that, and how do you bounce back from going back to your mission, going back to your purpose? How do you stay focused and have that clear vision, right? So I think the mind and the body are intricately linked. So for me, if I'm feeling some type of way, like I'm feeling down, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, or even like before today's podcast, I was feeling a bit nervous.
Yes.
I think that was a feeling that I was having. I think what I normally do to bounce back is to recenter my focus towards like my breath, towards my body, because then that takes me away from my mind. It takes me and anchor me back into my body. And then I use the breath, which, by the way, the breath, if you actually actively slowly control your breath, it can affect your autonomic nervous system. So that's the quickest way to bounce back from like feeling anxious, because when we're when we're feeling anxious, naturally we're gonna have thoughts of that reflects that anxiety,
Right.
and then that then perpetuates that feeling, and then that feeling creates more thoughts about your anxiety. You become anxious about becoming anxious, right? And then how do you break away from that, right? So I center my focus towards my breath. I slow down my breathing. That will trigger my parasympathetic response, because when we're anxious, we might become more shallow breathing. We're chest breathing. And that actually stimulates our sympathetic system, which is our fight or flight response. So that doesn't help. So I think learning like that aspect of wellness, learning how to ground yourself in your own body and telling yourself, hey, it's safe to be you. It's safe to be in your own body. And yes, you're feeling those emotions, but you're not those emotions. You're not those thoughts. Those are just something that's occurring in the present moment. But
It's like that observer.
But this too shall pass. So then now you're telling yourself, it's okay. You can allow yourself to feel depressed. You can allow yourself to be feeling anxious, because that feeling will dissipate over time. It's kind of like indigestion. You're feeling that in that moment, but over time, that's not going to be there permanently. So then I think the anxiety part of it, of feeling anxious about feeling anxious, that's gone, because now you know that's not a permanent feeling.
Right.
And now you're more focused and centered on your body, and because you're able to regulate your autonomic nervous system, how you feel then affects how you think, and you're able to take yourself away from that state, I think. So
Solid.
Yeah.
Solid.
Yeah.
How about you, Kevs? How do you feel mental health fits into your concept of wellness?
I'm still having a hard time differentiating mental health and wellness, essentially. I mean, like mental health and mental wellness.
You kind of feel as though they're like the same thing?
I would think so.
Well, then that sounds like it's a pretty big part of your idea of wellness.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
guess so.
even hearing like Dennis talk about that just now, it's like you use physical properties and practices to control the mental side of your concept of wellness. Right. So like maybe like if you had all of those different parts of your concept of wellness, right? We had physical, mental, emotional, and you had a couple other spiritual.
Yeah.
If all of those were good except for the mental piece of wellness, would you feel well?
I think that would be very hard to be possible, because if you're physically feeling well, you're emotionally feeling well, then usually your mind
should be good,
more or less going to feel good. I mean, that's my argument, but back to where I was saying, being more centered in the present moment, and less focused on like, because when we're feeling depressed or anxious, those are kind of struggles of time or perception of time, because being depressed means we don't see a future. We're just kind of stuck and we exist, and feeling anxious is feeling like we're anticipating about something bad that will happen. So we feel anxious because of maybe past experiences. That's the lens we're perceiving it through. So again, we're outside of the present moment, because now these are problems of time. You're thinking about past or you're thinking about future, but all there ever is, I mean, it's just the present moment. I mean, you can argue that there's time, but time is, I argue, is just a human construct. Because what is the planet doing? It's just rotating around the sun. And then we're all collectively agreeing, okay, so then that's where now it's 12 o'clock or now it's 1 o'clock, whatever the case. So we can function as a collective society, right? But I think outside of that, our bodies don't really understand the concept of time. They only understand what is being felt. And so you got to take yourself out of human conventions of like time and of tomorrow or yesterday. And again, centering back into this moment right now and giving yourself that space to feel and think through things without becoming attached or identified with what you're thinking and feeling. So breath and centering into your body, that's like a practice for me.
Yeah.
And doing movement training helps me become more mindful because I'm able to alleviate tension in my body. Because I would say if you're feeling tension in your body, chances are you're feeling tension in your mind. Your mind and your body are kind of a reflection of each other.
I feel like mental health might almost be like the result of wellness, you know, like if you are feeling well, then your mental health, like you said, is probably going to be pretty solid, you know? So I think it's a pretty big piece of what wellness is. And maybe if you're not putting it into like specific words here, that's fine, you know, but I think I would argue it's one of the bigger parts of wellness is your mental health. Dennis, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah,
thanks for coming and sharing all this stuff.
Have fun.
This will be a multi-listen one because I'm gonna want to like soak in all the stuff you said, or at least like a listen and pause and like make sure I got it. I really appreciate your outlook on stuff, man. I think it's cool, and I think you are very articulate in how you're describing all these things. It's just such a hard concept to be articulate about, but I think you did a stellar job.
It's a hard concept to grasp in the first place.
In the first place, and then to start having a discussion about it, that's a whole other thing.
With two dummies in the room.
With two idiots.
No, don't say that. That's a concept.
There you go. We got it.
I meant you and Reuben.
Oh, man.
No, okay.
Anyways, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody, I hope you all enjoyed this week's episode as usual, and we'll see you in another 2 weeks. We're going to be having, I think if everything pans out well, Jeff will be back next episode, and Jeff's a crowd favorite for the podcast. People love the guy. So he'll be here to spit some more shit, and we'll see what he says. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Peace.